after the webinar. In the event that you were unable to, you had to step away for a minute, you have to step away early, no worries. We'll make sure to circulate a copy of the recording to you afterwards. In addition, we do have an open Q&A throughout the session today, so feel free to submit any questions that you have along the way. We'll either address them throughout the webinar or we'll leave some time at the end for a Q&A as well. But with that said, let's get things going. So as far as an agenda, we're just going to do a brief introduction for everybody on the call today, and then we're going to pass the mic over to Pat so he can give a little bit of background on Andy J Egan, talk about their fab facility a bit. Then we're going to jump into where we will spend a bulk of our time today, which is discussing some of the common challenges that we're seeing with industrial construction and industrial prefabrication. We'll talk a little bit about the benefits of standardized workflows and utilizing technology to overcome some of those challenges. And while that all sounds great, we would like to see it in a real world capacity. So we'll actually go through a few featured projects that Andy Egan has done that'll touch on some of these benefits and how they're overcoming some of the challenges on some of those projects. If we have time, we'll get into a little bit of kind of what's next, what's the future looking like for industrial fabrication. And then, as mentioned, we'll leave some time there at the end for Q&A. But before we get going talking about ourselves, we would love to learn a little bit more about everybody else here on the call. So I'm going to put up a poll here, and if you have a moment, please feel free to go ahead and answer. So first question here, just trying to get a sense of who's on the call. What's your role, or where are you really spending the most of your time? Is it with the BIM or VDC team? Are you working in the fab shop or primarily out in the field? If it's a combination of both, just select what's most applicable. And then the second question, roughly what percentage of your work are you currently prefabricating? Is this something entirely new to you and you're not doing it all currently? Do you have a little bit of experience, or is a majority of your work in prefabrication right now? So we'll give everybody a minute here to answer those. Thank you all so much for participating. See, looks like about half the people have answered. Everybody a few more seconds to get their answers in. Alrighty, so let's take a look. It looks like we've got a good chunk of BIM and VDC on the call today or on the webinar, as well as a good portion of people in the fab shop and about 13% of you out in the field. What percentage of your work are you prefabricating? We got nobody on here doing no prefabrication, so that's great. It looks like we've got a good chunk of you doing, in fact, over 50%. So good to see. Thank you all for participating in that. So without further ado, I would like to go ahead and pass it along and let our co-hosts introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Andy Jisba, Director of Business Development here at M-Suite, focused on the industrial side of the business. Been proud to be part of this organization in a couple different ways over the last 4 years. Watched it grow. I know a lot of seeing the attendee list, a lot of you guys have known and been part of your guys' journey on here. So, and some of you guys that we're talking to about coming on to M-Suite. So I appreciate all of you guys joining. I've been in the construction industry since I was a teenager. Been focused on how do we do things more efficiently, industrial engineering as a background. And so getting things as efficient and as we can be ties into that. And so it's been kind of a transition over the years to how do we apply technology to this industry. And so really proud to be representing M-Suite here. And we got a great panelist with us today, Pat Heffron, who I've really enjoyed working with over the years, and we'll learn a lot from. So Pat, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Pat Heffron, Director of Fabrication here at Andy Egan. I've been with Egan since early 2000, in fact, January, and kind of moved up through the ranks in there. I was actually, like the note says there, a brickie before that, and got into the mechanical world, didn't know a whole lot about it, to be honest, and kind of moved into large construction as an estimator and got my feet wet there with project management. And after a few more years of that, got asked to come back into our fabrication shop. And then as that was growing rapidly by late 2000s, and then I've spent the majority of that with the fabrication group.
Great. How about you want to give us a little history here on Andy J Egan as a company?
Yeah, so Andy Egan is a full service mechanical contractor here in West Michigan, based in West Michigan. It's a little over 100 years old now. It was founded in 1919 by Mr. Egan himself, and he had actually passed away in 1932. And since then, it has been run by the Jasper family and 4 generations of the Jasper family, and it creates a very nice family-run operation with a good family background and leadership, and that's still currently ran by the Jasper family. So we had started fabricating early on in the 90s for ourselves, internal only, just looking to take advantage of some of the efficiencies and doing mechanical rooms, some light plumbing fab and things like that. And it started growing pretty good about by the time I came on around 2000 or so. And a few years after that, it started recognizing that there was enough efficiency there that we were gaining from fabricating for ourselves. So we wanted to look into maybe offering that to what we refer to as external customers. So, I mean, we're going to fabricate it and sell that fabrication package to clients and for their install so that they can benefit from it as well. And so we've been fairly successful in doing that. Today, we have about an even split. Most years it's about 50-50 to where we fabricate for ourselves and fabricate for external customers as well.
Great. You want to tell us a little bit more about the facility you guys manage here?
Yeah, so our fab shop is about 60,000 square feet or so in this one main building. We have a couple acres of a yard area that's, fenced in and secured for material storage and handling, some larger shipments of material, pipe mainly. We right now are in the mid to upper 20s as far as staff on the floor on a single shift. We've been as high over the years, into the 70s, I would say, in a couple of shifts. And then we support, like I say, all of Michigan, anywhere that our field services are in, which seems to, of late, been getting a little bit outside of the Midwest area too. We'll go out with good clients, and that's about our facility. Great resources and technology, and you see the picture there.
So, quick question on there. It looks something you got 16 weld bays there?
Yeah, I think there's about 16 in there. Something, Andy, that's interesting with it. I mean, we've kind of learned the, I guess I'll say that we learned the hard way as far as keeping our shop very modular. So even though those bays are set up nearly identical, so workers can go from one bay to another and feel, right at home. There's no learning curve there that they got to go through, or a bunch of, demobilization time to get set up. And then, but they're also not really attached to anything. So we do have the flexibility to move them around, which we do to accommodate different size projects, different size spooling, run them horizontal lengthways with the shop floor if we're doing a lot of longer work pieces, and then also in our high bays. Nice.
And what kind of material would you say your sweet spot, or the couple sweet spots that you guys carry?
So I think a pretty wide range. But right now, I think that question changes probably over the last 25 years or so. So early on, it was almost all carbon steel, right? And then, some stainless that we would get into, and that transitioned into a lot more stainless, and maybe 50-50 split between stainless and regular carbons. And then, the last 10-15 years, we've been getting a lot more into chromes and mollies and all those different materials that are, required in some of the industry today.
Great. So kind of the next section we want to do is just really kind of talk about some of the different challenges that we see across the industry in there, and some of your feedback on that. So kind of start off, and you already kind of mentioned it, your guys' transition through the years around fabrication. So one of the things we were talking about the other day is the complexity of jobs, and how you guys have taken on more complexity, both on-site and off-site, through the use of fabrication.
Yeah, I think that's very fair to say, and I did kind of mention it there when we had that transition, and probably what our sweet spot is, or the most material going through the shop, types of material. That was as a result of the changing and complexity of the job. So early on, it was very much, mechanical, light mechanical, heating, cooling, large projects, but all focused around, moving water and steam, low pressure steam, mid pressure steam. And it seems like, especially in the last 10 years, I'll say, maybe even more so in the last 7 or 8, we've really gotten into a lot more of a heavy industrial projects. And as a result, have also been fabricating for those, and kind of fabrication really jumped into it first, I would say, through our code stamp work, and making a lot of vessels and everything for the industrial sector. And that has been the biggest transition, I would say, in the requirements that those jobs need.
Well, and we've been kind of talking about the fab side, but the complexity, I think, is also jumped up on your design side of things too. I know you guys do some laser scanning, you guys got a BIM department, you got, we're still dealing with PDFs and coming from the engineers and stuff on a daily basis, but do you also talk about some of the complexity that have come in that now that you've, especially on these big, large industrial jobs?
Yeah, I think, just the requirement, everything is modeled nowadays, right? It's, BIM, you hear the buzzword, it's been a steady progression from that. I think we were, for sure in the West Michigan area, one of the early integrators with BIM and CAD in, late 90s, early 2000s. And I'll say the technical side of that has just grown, just every year. It seems like we're getting into new levels of things. There's new softwares out there, like you mentioned, scanning. We'll talk about that a little bit further down the road, things that have just helped us do things that I won't say were impossible maybe 20 years ago or 10 years ago, but they were just so time consuming and difficult that these technologies have just moved us right through that curve, and really gained some efficiency through the technology.
Well, it's probably brought some of that work back to your shop that you used to have to do in the field.
Yeah.
And stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
So, one of the things that you guys have had to do, we talked about how your shop changes and the flow changes as you guys have different work, but can you talk about, workflows that you guys have, and the focus you guys have put around standardizing workflows that you didn't have in the past?
Yeah. So I think, early on, it's also a function of the type of industry that we were in, and so as that's developed, the industries themselves, if they haven't changed, they have changed within their own industry and required just so much more stringent control, I'll say. And the technology has just enabled us to keep track of that without just massive labor hours. And, from going into, we talk about manual entry in there, I can attest to that. And some of the stuff through this technology has allowed us to, I'll say, identify our processes. So, we 100% believe in everything as a process, especially in this fabrication world, right? And you get burned if you cut corners or skip process steps. And we've learned that, and I'll get many times the hard way. And through some of this technology, M Suite Fab included, obviously, it has identified that and made those process steps very clear to everybody, visual, right? And made sure that we follow through. So different times, again, now it's like, we used to hear, NDE requirements would be, 1 in 10. And now it's like, it seems like it's just the norm. So that's, it definitely has changed. And the technology has allowed us to, I guess, work with that change without, spending just a gazillion hours trying to keep track of things.
Great. And you've kind of talked about some of the different things you guys are doing with manual entry. But you know, MTRs, you know, the NDEs that you were just talking about, you know, the need for, as you guys bring more and more into the shop, being able to track that and make sure everyone, not only the shop knows what's being done, but also your field, your PMs, you know, talk about a little bit how you guys leverage technology to help you guys manage the data that you guys have to track.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess the best way to explain it started out in Excel, right? You know, that was the simplest, great program, but everything gets in there, you know, manually from one thing to another. And so we would spend, you know, just a ton of time trying to get live updates as much as we could, you know, but that literally was done by, you know, there was no other way to do it besides walk the floor, identify it, grab a foreman. Myself, we do it a ton of just moving. And we found, you know, it's very easy because we were still creating bill of ladings. We were still accepting work into the flow. And we knew very easily what was on the floor and what was completed and gone, right? Those two steps were easy. But as far as where that was in between, was something that we just struggled, you know, tremendously with. And because some things, right, if it's one spool, a couple welds, it moves through pretty quick. So you see it at the beginning and the end quickly. Some of these other ones, especially when you start getting into the heavier walls, the more stringent weld procedures and post-weld heat treat and testing and hydro and all these other things, spools can be on the floor for weeks, right? So where they are in that exact process is something that the technology side of it, you know, has been tremendous. And so now I can open up my homepage, you know, in MSuite and see exactly what spools are, what percent complete, or what stage in our workflow they are. So that has been huge. And then aside from that, the MTR tracking, like I said, I'll say 20 years ago, it's very rare. It was a steam job when the inspector was stringent that we would have to even track welding, you know, welder IDs and MTRs and verify them and everything. And now it's darn near every job, I think, really. And so we're taking all those in the front end. And the way that this software works, we're able to enter right upon material receipt and verification. We're inputting that data, not to get into too deep in the weeds here, but that information is going in up front, right? And so we're detecting if we have any non-conformances very early on in the process, and then not allowing, again, with hold points, we're not allowing that work piece to move forward in the process until we verify that all those items are correct. So a little bit more painstaking on the front end, but it's still, you're doing it one time. And in other words, there was times in the past, I mean, heaven forbid you find that you have something wrong at the end of the process, right? You know, that's when it's a little more costly. And then, you know, even worse than that, what if it did end up getting installed or out to the end user to get installed? So this allows us to kind of verify that up front, and we enter it once. And then from there, all the guys are just selecting those items, selecting that work item at their particular, whatever stage in the process that they're at. So yeah, that is a big help, very big. And that again was all done, you know, manually with, you know, with a tracker and you know, literally a physical spool drawing.
Great. So you were telling me the other day that one of the things that you guys have done is also not only to your field teams and your internal teams, but also opened your insight into what's happening with your customers. And you want to tell us a little bit about what you do there and also what that feedback is from your customer base?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I guess two sides of it. I mean, let's face it, and the transparency of that, right, is it's very easy and not only transparent, it's efficient, because I would get, my foreman get, I don't know how many calls a day. Hey, where's this at? When's this going to be done? How are we sitting with this? We're able, with this software, we're able to set different permissive levels, right? We don't want people getting into deleting things or anything like that, but just as a view only level, we have standardized, you know, like I say, permissives that a customer or a job foreman might have a little bit more, all the way up to, you know, like an admin level, like myself, I can get in and cause all sorts of problems if I want. So, but what that does is that that takes away a lot of that going back and forth. They can just look themselves, right? And also it gives that super transparency, because especially if we get into, think of T&M projects or any of this other stuff that we work with, you can just see it just like we can, a customer can, or and even our foreman on site, material handlers and all sorts of things like that. So very useful to run reports and see what percent complete we are, et cetera.
Well, and that's giving you guys your time back, as we're dealing with skilled labor shortages in the industry, getting, people out there. I mean, one of the challenges I think a lot of people have is not only finding skilled labor, but willing to do something different, because they're worried that if they have a different process than somebody else, they might not be willing to come work for you because, we're implementing technology or other things, I just want to come weld. We'll talk a little bit how, one, you guys are dealing with that skilled labor shortage that the industry is seeing, and two, how do you overcome that kind of that change management, or is it a tool for you guys actually to help bring people in?
So yeah, a lot to those comments there, and I think that I've never seen the requirements or the demand on skilled labor like it is today. We're talking, numbers in the thousands of net shortages of skilled craft labor. And so the last thing we want is guys with a certain skill set, right? Say that welder that's excellent chrome welder, passes x-rays almost all the time and things like that. We want them doing that skill set. We don't want them trying to figure out what's coming next or where things are going. So it's just become a lot more efficient in the fab shop. And then obviously we fab as much as we can, just because, I don't have to get into 100 details on it, but the fabrication, it's a controlled environment, right? And it's efficient. And the better we get at that, the more we do it. And at the end of the day, the more affordable, more competitive we can be in the markets, more market share. I mean, everybody gets how it works, right? But the technology side of it has helped, I guess, streamline that and just make it more efficient. I was concerned when we went, to paperless and went onto this, that we were, putting a bunch of computers on the floor. The rumors were flying, and some of these guys are like, geez, I got into skilled craft because I didn't want to work on a computer. And so, this is, yes, it is a computer. It's on a screen now. It's not a piece of paper. It's the same thing. All it's done is identified our process. It's put that print on a screen. And some of those guys that were very stubborn have been, almost our best users too. The turnaround has been incredible. So it's very good. Yeah.
Yeah. And you just mentioned kind of paperless, and, and it comes back to that, in the past, you had lots of different paper, you had lots of different Excel sheets. We've talked about kind of you guys condensing that, but anything to add to either one of those topics?
Yeah, just, that's probably that makes me smile more than anything about the software, is just not having those dang travelers around. You got a few hundred spools on the floor at any time, right? And we, it's a physical traveler that's moving. That's the only way you can do it. That's your work control. That is your source of truth. That is where, your everything, that bill of material is on there. The requirements on there, the guy's welder ID, all this stuff is on there. Now that's on a screen and it's moving back and forth. There's no, if we lost that paper, and it does happen, somebody burns it up, throws it away when they sweep up their booth, whatever else, we're done. We're stopped. We got to figure out why, because we can't just go produce another paper. We might build something twice. So that just eliminated that whole thing. The paper waste side of it was just huge. And then, like I said, the document control of that, I've worked with a number of different, quality auditors over the years, major corporations, and this has been very helpful with MSuite. Just because, like you say, it's that single source of truth, meaning we and everybody knows here that that's the most recent rev. It's the correct rev. And if we don't want it at one instantly, we can pull it off the floor. We can stop it. We can put it in a holding area. Whatever we do, we don't have issues of somebody building, a change didn't get caught up. They thought they had the current rev. They didn't bring it into the office and destroy it or put it in the file. they kept it out there, and all of a sudden the foreman goes out and says, this isn't right. And they say it is, it's just like it is on my paper. Well, that's Rev 2. You got Rev 3 is what this is. Yeah. So this is eliminate that.
Yeah. So how are you getting all your steps in if you're not out chasing those travelers every day?
Well, if you could see from here down, you'd think maybe I'm not getting them all. So, yeah, right. But I appreciate I'm doing other things, right? I mean, it drive me crazy, right? Our superintendents, our foremen are out there, want them running work and organizing, moving things around, not answering phone calls about, tell me, I need to know exactly where these 40 schools, where are these all at? When is each one going to be done? Okay, it's like, do it today and then start over tomorrow and go back through because everything's moving and they want another update. It's like you would need to hire a couple people to do nothing but walk around the floor and just provide updates for every job. And yeah, so I don't miss the steps. I'll miss them up somewhere. Got to figure that
out. So we talked about standardizing workflows in the past. So do you want to kind of walk us through how you guys have gone through that process? I know it's always evolving, and you've talked about quality and quality programs and auditors and other things that you've brought into the past, and how are you guys leveraging that today?
Yeah, so I guess again, I mean, you guys would be better answer to how the software actually works, right? But I mean, essentially, we had, I'll say, many processes that we would try to adapt differently for different types of work. Anybody that's been in the quality world, if you start changing the rules over and over again, it's only a matter of time until you get burned. And so the way that we have it set up now, with M-Suite Fab is that there's different, hold points. So when we set up and we go through a turnover process and we identify all the requirements of a specific job, that gets incorporated into the workflow. And so a specific spool, once that is identified, for say a spool, could be anything, that is only stopping at the correct process steps, and only the correct people are seeing it at the correct time when the previous process has been completed. And so that's helped a ton. Inventory management, accountability. We had all sorts of, I'll say not all sorts, but I mean, every once in a while, somebody would do the old rob Peter to pay Paul, and we would grab a fitting because they needed a 3-inch 90 over here of this, and they knew it, and they walked by a cart and it's got a 3-inch 90, and they would take it over here to do theirs. And it's like, that's right, that can be a colossal error. Now this stuff's identified, and because it's actually easier for them to see like what heat number is for each specific fitting that they're installing and where it goes on their spool, it's not been eliminated. Anybody can still physically go mess something up by doing that. This has made it way easier, and we don't have to worry necessarily about a process step being missed. Even in the previous life, right? You identify all these requirements, what has to be done, if it's a coating, if it's, or RT radiograph, or if it's whatever these requirements are, you identify that, but any job has multiple different requirements for any different system or line or whatever it is. You could still set that up perfect in a turnover and have everybody involved, and the key players and the foreman and maybe even some floor people, and then have a meeting out there, and this is what this workflow looks like for this particular package. It still can mess it up. It still is very easy to, get in the rut that I've done this, and these I don't have to have a VT sign off on these, and all of a sudden you just switched into a different system and now it requires it. Well, now we identify that up front and we establish the workflow. Those hold points are, you physically gotta skip through it. You're not gonna miss it. You're not gonna forget to switch to a different requirement or a process. So I think that's, like you say, the accountability, it's held our feet to our own process in a lot of ways. It makes it very difficult to cut corners, I guess. And that's been pretty effective.
Appreciate that. I always learn something from talking to you. And I've been asking you a lot of questions, and some of the stuff you leads me to other questions. So just reminding the audience that if you want to ask me or Pat any questions, especially Pat, please post your questions on the Q&A sections on your screen. So we'd love to get your participation too. So I know we've kind talked about how you guys have changed some of the ways you guys are using technology today, not just M-Suite Fab, but as you guys are looking at process changes, as you guys are looking at your continuous improvement and other things, I want to talk about like what it's like to implement new technology, the change management that goes behind that, and just kind of some feedback on, you've done this in a couple of years ago. What is your feedback for other groups on how they should think about implementing and selecting and also implementing that technology?
So I would say, first, don't be intimidated by it. We had talked about some kind of method to going, let's say, paperless for a long time. And, it's just something we try to tackle and develop something simple on our own or find. And then that's why, we went with M-Suite, because they were specifically focused into the mechanical world. But I would say then, like I put on there in the notes, just start small, pick something that, don't try to do it in your largest, most complicated project that things are going crazy. Maybe pick a little bit of a downtime, or pick a project or two to get into it would be some of my best advice. And then once you get into it, we actually implemented, like you mentioned, Andy, a few years ago, and we chose a time where we knew we could have done it sooner, maybe by 6-8 months. We knew we kind of were wrapping up a few big projects and we're going to have less on the floor in the fall when we actually implemented. And so we went live. We chose that time, because there was just less to try to deal with. And then we did one project at a time. And then once we went live, we did go all in. Excuse me. And so I think that's probably a good piece of advice. And then, just be relentless, use it, and just keep using it. And then it just becomes more automatic.
And, you're always adding people, you're always having people, leave and new people come in. How difficult is it to bring people into the way you guys do things at Andy J Egan? And how is that received as people are, one, what's the effort? And two, how's it being received by those new individuals?
Yeah, it varies tremendously. For the most part, I think everybody thinks it's pretty cool, to do this, and it's something that they haven't had an opportunity to do. And it has had its challenges. Some people are a little quicker with it, some aren't. I'm now kind of getting into that group of, the old guys, and a lot of the people that are just getting involved, they're better than I am, right? And they've grown up with, PCs, iPads, laptops, all that stuff. And so it's a pretty easy transition. In fact, I learned things from the guys on the floor all the time about different. I was like, I didn't know you could do that. You don't want to see it. But so there's a little apprehension, I think, at first into it. But once you do kind of go through with them, and everybody recognizes it is no different. It's just now on a screen. Things are a little, I'll say, more challenging to get used to, annotating drawings, doing things like that if you're not familiar with, working in a, Adobe or Bluebeam or something, that it's a little different. But for most part, everybody's kind of done that. And it's not too bad. And then as they help each other too, right? So, one worker will help another. Hey, why is this thing not opening? What am I doing here? It's like, oh, you're in the wrong workstation or whatever it is. So there's some challenges, but it's pretty quick, really. I mean, it's the same morning, an hour or two, and we get them logged on to start a shift. It's pretty straightforward.
Yeah. And then how does the team feel about it? We just talked about the onboarding, but do you guys get resistance from the team, or kind of wishing they would move back to paper? I know you've talked about you wouldn't want to move back to paper, but how's that workforce on the floor feel about it?
I think they wouldn't go back, for anything. I think that they do have challenges at times, though. When we get, like I mentioned up front, we're setting up flows. It is possible you mess something up, or that they have a work item and for some reason it jumps to all of a sudden the QC stage and didn't pass through something else because we didn't have it set right, or we accidentally put it in the wrong flow. So there's those little glitches that'll happen once in a while, and you'll hear complaints. But I think overall, I mean, just again, the frustration on I can't stress enough, the foreman superintendent level, they can do the same thing. We host, 2 times a week, we do a full blown, all the foremen come in and, our operations manager, and we go through a production meeting. And, those meetings now sometimes, they can push an hour or so, but it's usually, 20, 30 minutes. We rip right through those because they've already been seeing, that homepage where all the stages are and stuff. I can't imagine anybody wants to go back to, to trying to see the Excel stuff and how many times in the meeting you get, well, that's really, that's further along than that, or when's this going to be done? And when's that going to be done? And when is this going to start? So a lot of those things, I think, maybe you start getting accustomed to how nice it is, maybe taking it for granted, but when you really broke it down, nobody's going back.
Okay, great.
So we have another poll for everybody here. I'm gonna go ahead and launch that and go ahead and just fill it out when you have a minute. We're trying to get an understanding of those on the webinar today. Are you currently using a Fab Shop software besides Excel? Give everybody a few seconds there to answer. And just as Andy said, there is Q&A that's open. Feel free to just submit any questions you have. That way, we'll make sure we get to address your question when we get to the Q&A portion. Give everybody another second here. All right, and it looks like we got about a 45-55 split. So that's about as expected. A good mix of people who have delved out of Excel and those who have not. So thank you everyone for answering that. Now we'd like to, again, go through how is this really featured in a practical setting. So here are a few examples of some featured projects from Andy J Egan.
Yeah, so this was a gas utility company here in Michigan that we did this project for, and actually took the project over. This was probably the biggest thing in here was the scanning, right? Is this those vertical towers that you see there, the D-high tanks, those were installed on site by another contractor, and we had to match this piping up to them. We're able to scan that and pull all that into fabrication and build it long before we could actually get to that work front on site. And we actually did find that a few of the flanges were a little bit askew, made those adjustments through BIM and pulled those scans in. And we were able to go out. We probably never would have attempted that, and if you can imagine, it would have been guys up on lifts and plumb box and levels and lasers and trying to figure all that stuff out. We scanned it, brought it in, checked through it, overlaid it on the model. We actually found a couple as-builts that were wrong. This, like I say, was an existing compressor site, and there was some piping that wasn't exactly in where they had thought it was. And so through scanning it and pulling that in through Fab, we probably would have done a lot more field work and then had, completed a lot slower, I would say, than what we were able to. Then another project we'd completed recently was for Lansing Board of Water and Light, 250 megawatt combined cycle plant. And we were able to fabricate, the vast majority of this. I think the probably the single biggest piece of this was that was knowing I got actually to see it from the other side too. I happened to be the PM on it for us, and got pulled back into the field and got to see our own fab shop fab for ourselves. So I kind of got to complain to myself a little bit. I don't know how you say that, but knowing where things were and when we were going to receive them, what was on site, what was in fabrication, what systems were complete when, and then having the confidence that, again, all the levels and the hold points were going to be completed as designed, just gave us a huge piece of security. But by far and away, it was just, the thousands of spools going down there, knowing where they were and what we were what we were able to do at the time. That was huge. What was coming when. And just another one, this was for Bowen. We did, a bunch of schools for these guys and have been, fortunate to have a lot of their business over the years. And this would, I guess, represent a very good average project. And we were just cranking through, hundreds of schools on the regular basis to pretty tough, stringent specifications. And we're able to share, a lot of that transparency with them as far as, production schedules and where things were at. It's a very good project, I think, on both sides.
So just quickly, what are some of the big trends that you're noticing in the industrial sector? We'll dive a little bit into this and then really open things up here for Q&A to end things off.
Sure. I think, there's been a huge move right towards alternative energy, and specifically speaking, in Michigan and the Midwest, everything is, getting away from coal, right? So there's a ton getting away from coal, moving towards, battery power, combined cycle, gas fired combined cycle plants. And we've been really targeting that market and have had some pretty good success in it. And I think we're going to continue to see it, like it says in there, Michigan, by 2025, I think is a lot of people's goal, moving back and forth on some of that, but it's a huge undertaking, right? Because now you have this power grid that needs to, be maintained. And that probably is getting larger, right? Because now we're building, battery plants, of course, are a new thing. They're monster facilities. And then, how are we going to charge all those batteries? Where are we going to provide the energy to? So that's definitely, I would say, the most recent trend has been in that area, the power, and then the new facilities to build the power, the batteries, and the power that it takes to charge them. So yeah, that's definitely and those are stringent worlds, right? To fabricate for and to do piping for, because they have a lot of requirements and obviously high powered steam and et cetera.
And trying to get enough people to meet the needs of all the projects that you guys are out there trying to win. You guys want to be as efficient, as productive, and also attractive to the workforce as possible, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that is nice, I guess, on our side, as being a fabricator and an installer. So it's, a lot of our guys can move back and forth from the fab shop to the field, and it, gives us just that much more flexibility to meet demands of, the ebbs and flows. So yeah, that is a big advantage, and then being attractive to it too. It's also a plus.
I'm sure up in Michigan, having a roof over your head for a few months of the year is also very attractive to some of your employees.
Yeah. It doesn't get quite as, they could probably argue that it doesn't get quite as hot out there. It does get warm and muggy some days, but in the winter, it never drops below 60. And that's very attractive for about 6 to 8 months out of the year around here for sure.
Yeah.
Well, great. Thank you so much, Pat, for walking through the background of Andy Egan, a little bit of your history and some of the challenges you guys have seen and how you're overcoming them. So we'd really like to just open up the floor this time to a Q&A. So again, if you have any questions, you can submit them directly through the webinar, the Q&A button. Do have a few that we can start going through here. So let's see. So here's a question. You mentioned that there were some hiccups along the way. How did support help you overcoming some of those hiccups?
So yeah, there is, and I'll say this first. There's probably more on when we recognized our own processes and some of the inconsistencies that we had. Like M-Suite's not very good at bending any kind of rules. It's you establish them, you get them right, and you follow them, and that's tough, right? I mean, there's a lot of flexibility we would do, and a lot of times that you're dealing with guys that build things, and they're used to figuring out ways to fix problems and do things on the fly. And when you get in a process type world, there's not a lot of flexibility there. So a couple of the things that I think M-Suite does well, they have a chat feature. So it's like any of our guys, any of the users, they can quick fire off a chat. And if it's a pretty straightforward thing, they can get a bunch of guidance right there. And that's huge as far as some of those hiccups. Otherwise, the other, you guys, and, from Andy and your standpoint, I mean, you guys have been very flexible and actually coming out here or setting up a web call and working through some things. And we have, as we identified some of our workflows, we started out with, hey, we need a couple, 2 or 3 workflows. We actually have that all into one now. And we're able to take anything from the simplest spool or just say a copper plumbing drop, okay, all the way to a complicated whole skid assembly. And we actually have all that stuff worked through the same workflow. So I would say that was a big challenge, was figuring out how to get that straight. And then the rest of it really was just trying to learn that we needed to input all that material and couldn't cut corners. We couldn't start using something or moving it through a stage until we'd used it. Once we got those things straightened out, it got a lot smoother. We did have, data wouldn't show up or an MTR wouldn't appear. It wasn't populated. We knew it was there, things like that. Those are some small, some of the hiccups, but we've been able to iron most of that stuff out.
Awesome. And then here's another one. Do you have any machines that you're integrating with M-Suite?
So right now, I'm going to say no. So we've thought about it a lot. There was the tire stop thing. We have a HDG pipe profiler. I would like to do some more integration with that. It does integrate, from our BIM team to it. We still do a lot of things manually there. But I have not done anything as far as, cut lists or anything like that. They of course come down and go straight to it, but not as far as actually running something from data provided from, not totally automated, I'll say, if that makes sense.
Okay, here's another one. How did you transition to trusting the data that's in the system?
It takes time. I will say I'm there's a couple, I'll say different, I'm not sure if what this question is directed at, but the data that was in there as far as work instruction was very easy, I guess, to trust, because it's now with Revit and everything, it's pretty much a direct, I'll say, push from one system to another. So it's the way it is in Revit. It's the way it is, in M-Suite Fab. So that's very easy to trust. I don't have any issues there. And then as far as the reporting, you got to remember too, it's the garbage in, garbage out thing. And so as we've worked through, a lot of that, we're beginning to get more accurate data and more good, better feedback, and starting to recognize a lot of bottlenecks in our process, because we can collect data now from so many different areas that were, just impossible to, again, unless you wanted to hire a couple people with a stopwatch out there all day long to try to track it. There's things we just didn't even look at. So yeah, I hope that answers that question, I guess, as far as which data we're referring to there. But
No, yeah, I think you hit it spot on. One more here. How long did it take from when you decided to go with M-Suite to when you were able to use it efficiently?
so like I mentioned, I think it was actually in, I'll just say springtime, maybe in a May, June area, that we pretty much made the decision we were going to go with it. And then we kind of selected that time later in the fall, like I mentioned earlier, because it was a little bit of a slower time for us. And then once we set it up, actually, 2 people from M-Suite came out and sat down with us. That was a 3-day process. So I really had zero confidence we were actually going to do it in 3 days, and we did. And like I say, there were some bumps along the way, but we were running it within 3 days. 3 long days. We spent a lot of time, and like I say, we found a ton of things in our own process. Just identifying different process steps too, that, you got to be able to know what your process steps are for it to work right in BIM Pro, or in Fab Pro, BIM Pro too, for that matter. But you have to identify your own process steps, because that's all this is. It's think of it like gates, and holding your system through those gates, right? And what point of that workflow and that stage in the process is one gate, if you will. And so if, in other words, somebody's cutting pipe, that is a gate. And until that pipe is cut, it's not going to be available visually for the other person down the road to work on it. And so different things coming through there were a little tricky until we got that ironed out, to see what things we wanted to allow something to start happening, what things we wanted to allow it to be complete. Of course, you would ask me, I'd have a different answer than the people on the floor. They always wanted to start a partial. I always wanted to keep it complete before things are started. But that whole process was about 3 days. And then I'll say we're still improving it today. That's the honest truth. So how long does it take? Obviously depends on how complex your processes are and how many users you have probably. But I would say once you build the framework, probably, I don't know, 3 to 5 days, I would say you're going to be running from the time you hit go.
Awesome. Great to hear. One more here from the attendees. How long did it take to develop a BIM team, and how many are on the team?
So, we have a different department, that actually is in our BIM team. There is, geez, good question. I'm going to say, I don't know, 18 to 22, just a guess. I haven't actually counted them, somewhere in there. And that has been being developed. Went full blown in 99, I think, is when we first started, that kind of broke off out of our engineering group and started a CAD specific group. Back then BIM wasn't totally a thing yet. And so that's been in development that long. And I can tell you, they would say themselves, they're growing and developing today too. But like I mentioned, now if they've taken on laser scanning and point layout, and, all the stuff with the technology, that very much there's a lot of development still going on. But I think initially, we were drawing things very simple, and very simple hydronic systems, in 99, and that was with one person, and it's just grown. And now it's, like I say, I would guess that somewhere in the 20s probably, of people. And it's a rare craft. Talk about a skilled group of people to get to that can draw well and efficiently and accurately, because that is the beginning of it all. And we have a mix too. I think I would note that, recommend to anybody, is a good mix of, like, college grads trained in it formally through college, in something in the information technology or CAD. And then a lot of our other guys are seasoned foremen that were foreman superintendents in the field and have come in and learned the technology side to do what they've been doing forever. That mix is huge, especially when the guys are doing coordination, and they're coordinating jobs, to be able to incorporate that hands-on experience so they can understand how to make something serviceable, what it means for valve handles and operators and maintenance and things like that, to incorporate in coordination is huge. So that process, keep a mix there, of the techies, the seasoned vets, and I think life gets a lot easier.
Real quick follow-up, and I know we're getting close to the end of time, but some of that's going through your BIM team. How much also is going through PDFs and other workflows and drawings coming from the field and stuff like that?
Yeah, that's a good point. I would say we're 85 to 90%, probably higher, is everything is coming through the BIM team, but we still promote guys to do the hot shot items. Larger coordinated jobs, are obviously 100% through BIM. But we every single day receive, we say, little napkin sketch or a PDF, or just a lot of times just on ISO paper. A foreman sketches out 3 or 4 spools that they need. And then we actually still use the back end of our BIM team, puts that in for us, but they are just, they're scanning that or accepting that PDF. And that's actually the page the guy sees on the floor, obviously on a screen still. And then they plug in the work items. So it goes through our process correctly in M Suite, but it hasn't actually been drawn through BIM. It's still just a PDF, like what anybody would sketch, or, any of your foreman or journeyman would make in the field.
Great.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Pat, for answering all those, we do have one final question that I would like to address, and they're asked, are you going to show how M Suite works? So not today on this webinar, but as mentioned, we're going to be following up with everybody with a recording of today's webinar. Feel free to reach out and we'll have a discussion with you about how M Suite works and specifically how it'll work for your business. So you'll have all the contact information that you guys need. A huge thanks to Pat for joining us today, walking through his journey. It was a great session learning from an industrial leader how they've overcome challenges and are really embracing technology and prefabrication. So with that, we're going to wrap a few minutes short here. And thank you to everybody who was able to join us on the webinar today. Hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.